So when it comes to rent in advance, there are much tighter rules about how much rent can be requested and paid in advance. And landlords are no longer able to request more than 1 month's rent in advance. So quarterly, 6 monthly, annual rent up front is no longer permitted. Tenants can choose to pay rent in advance after the first month, if they wish, but if they leave early, any overpayment would need to be refunded. It's also not permitted to take additional rent upfront in place of a deposit. That was actually already banned under the Tenant Fees Act. And most importantly, rent must not be requested or taken before the tenancy agreement has been formally executed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to elaborate here. We previously followed contract law, where consideration, which is payment, so in our case, the first month's rent, was required in order to validate the tenancy contract. And there was generally a clause written into the AST that it was a condition of the contract that the first month's rent must be received in full prior to the tenant collecting their keys. So if a tenant didn't pay their rent in full prior to moving in, you could refuse to allow him entry. And I say him because I've got a particular tenant in mind as I say this, who we had to do this with in the past. Now, however, the contract is considered validated upon execution rather than upon consideration. So if the same situation to occur under the Renters' Rights Act and the tenancy was executed, but the tenant didn't have the first month's rent, we will be legally required to hand over the keys anyway. This is one of the details under the Renters' Rights Act where rent guarantee protection, I feel, will be invaluable because it's going to protect your rental income even if the tenant doesn't pay the first month's rent. So from day one, you're still protected. But it's, again, one of these little quirks in the legislation that might be fleshed out through case law at some point in the future. But for the time being, this is the way it's written, and this is what we as letting agents and landlords must do. Most tenants won't, most tenants will, most tenants are good and will pay the rent in full upfront before you hand the keys over, but you might get the odd rogue tenant who tries on. So just something to be aware of, that if they do, unfortunately, you must hand over the keys to them.